Again for a knowledge management webinar with APQC. I am Lynda Braksiek, the research lead for knowledge management here at APQC, and I'm very excited for this topic today, unlocking the synergy, knowledge management and artificial intelligence. So we're really glad to see you all, and we have some guests joining us today as well. But I'm very excited to see all of the locations on the chat. I mean, we've got people from all around the world gathering today, so this is going to be a great conversation. So welcome to the webinar. And I can't get the slides to advance for some reason. Lauren, could you, there we go, thank you. And this is our agenda for today. So we're gonna do a little bit of upcoming opportunities at APQC, so you always know what's going on. And as always, to set us up for the topic that we have today, I'm gonna share just a little bit of research from APQC to help set the stage for really why we're even here talking about this. And then I'm going to turn it over to our friends from Novartis today. We have Ian, Joseph, and Lorenza here, and they will introduce themselves in a little bit more detail about their roles when they begin to tell their story in just a few moments. And then, as always, we like to provide you with some key resources at the end of this presentation. So make sure when you get a copy of this, you take a look at it. You can check out some APQC resources. And you can see some of the other activities and upcoming things going on at APQC. So the other thing I want to mention is also that throughout this discussion, you are free to use the chat or the Q&A feature. We will stay on top of it. We would love for you to put your questions and comments related to whatever it is that we're talking about, so we can speak to them and comment on them and answer them in the moment throughout the presentation. So love to collaborate with all of you. So bring on the questions. Just a reminder, with a couple of upcoming KM engagements, we're getting closer to the end of our calendar year. So today is actually our final webinar of the year, and we're going to close out the year in December with an actual member roundtable where we're going to talk about the future of KM, the roles and the skill sets, and how we work with experts into the future from a knowledge management perspective. And then you'll notice we already have a couple dates chosen for next year where we'll start talking about 2025 priorities and looking at some knowledge transfer capabilities early next year. And one final reminder that we have a certification course available to everybody coming up in December if you're interested. So let's take a look at just a couple of key research areas and insights to set the stage for our friends from Novartis today. So this is just a look at from our most recent emerging technologies research on what does that current investment level for artificial intelligence look like in organizations. And you can see at the current level, we've got about 43% of the people responded said they're at least moderately invested, if not all the way to extremely invested. So we've got a lot of activity going on. Even 35% are at least slightly invested right now. A couple of years ago, if we asked this question, these numbers would have been far less. So lots of activity happening, as you all know. But look at that expected change in the next 3 years. I mean, wow, 86% are going to increase a little or a lot of their investment in AI. So this is where a lot of us are spending our time, which is why we're talking about it. Also anxious to see what those numbers look like when we see our 2025 priorities again. I'm having trouble. There we go. Okay, artificial intelligence deployment. So one of the things that we're doing now at APQC is we're looking at some of our research based on the level of maturity of the knowledge management program or capability within the organization. Helps us to see, is there some practices out there that we could really be pulling on for those folks that are just getting started, so at maybe a lower level of maturity, compared to what are those doing who have a higher level of knowledge management maturity. So how can we strive to get to building some of those practices in? Now, in this case, for this research, these are self-reported maturity levels. So I just want to caveat that. These are self-reported, but they're based on the definitions that APQC uses for maturity from a level 1 to a level 5. Okay, so you can see here that in the deployment area that we've got 51% of people who are at that mature KM level are at the minimum piloting, if not implementing, operating, and even some are already optimizing some of their solutions compared to that 38% with those more less mature organizations. So obviously, the capability to advance your technologies and have that support and maybe even budget and leadership buy-in really does help as you mature your entire KM program. Then just a little look at, I'm sure some of you probably recognize a lot of these things. On the left side, you've got your drivers for knowledge management technology. And on the right side, you've got those barriers, just those things you need to keep in mind. Now, these two things aren't directly correlated. It's just to show you these are those common drivers and the common barriers for implementing new technologies. Things like we're using technology to improve knowledge sharing. We're trying to provide better access to content and so on. And also those barriers, competing with other changes seems to always be at the top of the list, right? It's really hard to compete with lots of other change going on in the organization or a lack of processes that are documented. So we can't support it with technology because things aren't structured well enough. So just keep in mind some of those drivers and barriers when you're listening to Novartis talk today. They're going to share with you some of their best practices. And then just one final thing is to look at what are those expected benefits of AI? Why are we doing this in the first place? A lot of this has to do with building automation in so we can streamline our processes, reduce that redundancy in our work, and make better decisions. And those last two, I think, really speak to those of us that have worked in content management as part of KM throughout our careers, that we can help improve how we build taxonomies, advance our content management capabilities by using some of these AI capabilities, but also improve the quality of the information and content that we have out there for our users as well. A big deal. And a lot of people, if you've heard, some people are using these for, you use some of the simpler AI tools, maybe like a meeting summary or capturing actions for your meeting because the meetings are being recorded. Using it to help find experts, things like that. So those are some of the benefits that we're starting to see people actually reap from their AI deployments. Now, before we get started, we'd like to set the stage for our guest speakers and just find out, what does this look like in your organization? So what tangible benefits, if any, are you currently seeing from your organization's AI implementations? And if you're not currently doing anything, that's okay. We have a checkbox for that as well. This just helps us kind of set the stage and see at what level of maturity some of you all have with your AI deployments. So we'll take just a second.
And Lynda, we have 227 participants today, so we're going to give them just a little bit of extra time to.
Absolutely. I love that. I was just looking at those numbers and it's fantastic. And I'm looking at where all the people are coming from. I can't believe the different countries represented today and the different states around the United States. This is fantastic. And for those of you that couldn't join us today and are listening to the recording, we hope you enjoy this as well, and would love to have you join us in a future webinar.
We've got about 150 responses, so I'm going to go ahead and end it so we can move on.
You got it. Let's see what we've got here. Mostly, I think kind of that it's about that operational efficiency and productivity. So putting automation in place, enhancing content management, that's good. Search capability is way up there as well, 43%. Access to expertise. I'd love to talk to some other folks in the future too about how you're using AI to do that access to expertise. I'd love to see some best practices in that space. Upskilling is a big one. Creation of new content. That's another one. Talking to some companies, they've been a little bit leery sometimes of using it to create new content because of the quality of the work coming back. So we're going to be spending more time talking about that creation of new content as well with some of those generative AI. And then we still have 25% not currently using. That doesn't surprise me. So we have some industries that are a little bit slower, maybe to adopt some of these because of some regulations and issues with data privacy, big concerns. But this was great. We're using it. We're getting benefits in all of the categories in some way. So that's fantastic. Okay, I think we don't have any questions or anything. I'm going to go ahead and advance to our next slide, which is going to introduce to us our guest speakers for today, Novartis. So Ian, Joseph, Lorenza, I'm going to let you all take it away, and we look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you very much, Lynda. Hi, everybody. I'm Ian. I'm going to switch to the next slide, I hope. Let's see. There you go. There you go. So I'm Ian. I'm Director of Business Operations in Novartis. And really, that makes me kind of in charge of a bunch of the knowledge management stuff that's going on here. But I've got the real brains of the operation on with me today. So I'm going to pass over to Joseph.
Great. Hi, folks. Joe Pisari. So I'm knowledge management team lead in Novartis. So my role in all of this is really working with folks like Ian in particular, but some other folks around Novartis to understand what's the organizational strategy around knowledge, what's really important, and translate that into an actual solution. So bringing together all the capabilities, solution design, development, change management, data content management technology, all that kind of stuff, bringing it together and making it a reality. Although something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, you can have the best solution in the world, and if you don't get people to use it, it doesn't matter. So Lorenza, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Lorenza Geronimo, and I'm the knowledge management change lead. So my job really is to make sure that we drive adoption of the solutions that we build among our users.
Wonderful. So we're going to talk a little bit today about kind of the knowledge management and specifically the generative AI solution that we've got built in Novartis. I'll do a little bit of setup around kind of the context of that, and I think Joseph and Lorenzo will talk you through how we've done it. Let's put it that way. So for context view here, I'm just going to see if I can switch the slides. It seems like it's playing games with me today. There you go. So for context for everybody, I know how much everybody talks about this topic, but this for me was really the slide for me that really kind of made it stick, is how fast AI is moving kind of as a technology, but more than just a technology, kind of how much it's kind of having an impact and where the skills it has to do that. You can see here, there's a line across the top there, human performance as the benchmark, right? And in lots of these different kind of fields in which AI is playing at the moment, you can see where and how quickly it overtook humans in being able to do tasks that typically we think that we're very good at, right? Like handwriting recognition, speech recognition, et cetera, et cetera. For me, this is kind of a really interesting thing, but it also begs the question. The question is, so how do we turn it from just being another cool thing that we all talk about and we know that's out there and it's moving fast and whatever, into something which is actually driving value, right? I'm going to jump to the next slide. Let's see. Oh, there you go. So everybody's excited, right? And you know, everybody knows that kind of that Gartner hype curve, right? Novartis was no different. Within 6 months of ChatGPT coming out, we had literally thousands of use cases of people saying, hey, generative AI is going to change the way that we do blah, right? I know because I'm kind of running a bunch of generative AI stuff across Novartis. That was a problem, right? Because lots of people thinking that it can do lots of stuff, but the reality is, what can it actually do? If I just jump to the next slide. So these were some of the challenges that we found here, right? So not many people actually understood what generative AI is and what it was capable of doing. From those that understood it, even fewer actually knew how to use it, right? And then from those who knew how to use it, even fewer knew how to actually drive value with it. Practically speaking, you know, most people thought it was going to change the world, right? The people that actually, you know, was like, okay, well, now I know a use case that I can apply this to, right? But even fewer still were like, the use case that I'm going to apply it to actually, you know, is one that is valuable for my business. A lot of the use cases that we were seeing were kind of cool, right? But weren't tied to actually driving value. And that gets us to this slide, right? So we're heading for disaster. This was in 2020. So before the whole generative AI thing, Gartner came out with a study, 99% of artificial intelligence initiatives will fail due to a lack of knowledge management foundation. That's a great headline, But really the why, I think, is more important. The why comes to things like scalability. It comes to things like sustainability and compliance. So scalability, if I talk practically in the terms of generative AI, it's very, very easy to get the first 10 pieces of content. Put those 10 pieces of content into ChatGPT and go and tell your manager, hey, this is fantastic. It's going to change the world. And your manager will say, I mean, yeah, it looks cool, right? Great. But then what happens after that, right? The 10 pieces of content that you got your prototype, what happens with the next 1,000 pieces of content? How do you get those 10,000 pieces of content out of the business to plug into your generative AI solution so that it actually scales and it's going to work not just today, but it's going to work, in a year's time still? And then sustainability. Okay, great. Let's imagine somehow you've got those 1,000 pieces of content. What happens when 100 of them change and now they're out of date? Right? And they're not valuable anymore. Well, your LLM doesn't know that they're not valuable anymore. So you need governance over the top of your content to really kind of enable that, right? The latest and greatest content in there, and also to remove the old stuff so it doesn't get confused. And then compliance is another one of the big issues, right? So there are lots of organizational complexities. I'm sure a lot of people in this conversation know about the organizational complexities of just bringing in an LLM into any company, right? Legal and compliance are kind of a little bit stressed about this, and rightly so. I'll give you one example, which happened to me personally. I had a consulting company come not long after kind of the Gen AI hype was out there. They'd built something they thought was fantastic, and they wanted to bring it to me to sell. What they were trying to bring to me was it was actually a bot which they thought could replace MSLs. Now, an MSL is a medical scientific liaison. I won't go too far into the details of kind of what their job is, but safe to say they have to be real detailed expert on the medicine that Novartis sells. We're a pharmaceutical company. They have to be real experts on the medicine, and they have to be able to talk to doctors about that medicine. Okay, so this company was coming to me and saying, well, hey, look, we can replace the need for these MSLs, for these people that know the medicine, because we can just train a bot on all this medicine, and it will be fantastic, and it will have all of the answers, and it will do wonderful things for you. You can save millions and millions of dollars doing this. I said, okay, well, I don't believe you, but let's get on a call and you can show it to me. So we got on a call and they showed me their bot, and they said, okay, ask it some questions. Let's see the answers, find out what you think. So the first question I asked it was, what is the efficacy of this drug on patients aged, I think, 20 to 40, right? And it came back with a perfect answer. It had been trained really well on the data that sat out there. It was really, very high class answer. I said, great. And I said, okay, well, what is the efficacy of this drug on pregnant women, right? And it came back again with a perfect study. I said, okay. And they were like, oh, it's great. We've proved the value for you. You can just buy it now. I said, okay, well, what's the efficacy of this drug on pregnant pineapples? And they were like, what? Pineapples can't get pregnant? We're not going to put that in. That's stupid. I said, no. Put it in and let's see what it comes back with. And it gave me a perfect answer for pregnant women. I said, well, see, that's your problem, because the LLM is guessing at what the answer is going to be. And pregnant pineapples is a really stupid example. But then I asked them to tell me the efficacy of the drug for men aged 12 to 15, which I knew that this drug hadn't got any efficacy studies on. And it gave me a perfect answer for men aged 20 to 40. I said, well, you see, that's the problem. Because if a doctor asks a question to an MSL will know how to give the right answer. An MSL will know pineapples can't get pregnant. An MSL will know that, this drug has not been tested on this group that you're asking about. But an LLM might not. And if it gives the wrong answer, and in the worst case scenario, we end up killing somebody because it gave them the wrong answer, now that's a big problem, right? And so when I think about these kinds of problems, scalability, sustainability, compliance, that's one example of how these problems kind of come together to cause real problems for an organization that's trying to do generative AI very well. So how do we stop that from happening? How do we stop that cliff, those problems? Really, it comes down to these things here, which are knowledge management kind of basics 101, right? Understand your content, consolidate it, put it together into one place, and curate that content. Make sure you got proper governance over it. And this is a quote that I like at the bottom here that came from one of my managers when we were having a conversation. If knowledge is the new data, then knowledge management is the new data science, right? I think for me, that really hits it home, because people talk about knowledge being the new data. Now we've got generative AI and we can work with it in a different way, but people don't yet talk about how important, how critical knowledge management is to being able to drive that conversation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I say we, it's actually going to be Joseph that's going to talk mostly about how we've done that to success in Novartis. But what impact does that make? Like I say, it addresses those challenges we saw before, right? Scalability, sustainability. It makes it compliant because now you can understand what's there and you can drive it towards, the company's goals. But also, it ties it directly to value, right? We're able to look at those LLMs. We're able to look at what we're trying to do, and we're able to drive it through from A to Z in terms of driving value for the business. And that's really the game that we're all in, right? And I think LLMs are a great opportunity for us to, as a KM function, prove how much value that we can have. But I'm going to shut up. I'm going to pass over to Joseph because he's got very interesting things to say.
Great. Thanks very much, Ian. So leveraging knowledge management to power AI, what does that actually look like? I think Ian covered some of the key points. I'm going to come back to a lot of those. But really, I want to tell this in the sense of a story of what we've done in Novartis and a little bit about what we've learned as we've done that. So in Novartis, we implemented a knowledge management solution. We call it Sherlock. We were actually speaking with APQC a year ago. So if you were in that webinar, we were talking about the early days of Sherlock. Then we've progressed things significantly and brought generative AI to bear there. So today, Sherlock addresses a number of use cases. We're doing loads of things. We're delivering a lot of value for the organization. But when we started, we focused on one business problem in particular, and that was essentially the unnecessary, the duplicated effort and spend on market research and insights in the organization. So as a company, we weren't leveraging what we knew. We weren't getting value out of it, and we were paying a lot of money for the same type of knowledge twice, either to acquire it or to create it. So we had a very clear business problem, and focusing on that business problem was very intentional and important to our positioning in the beginning. And as we expand the use cases of Sherlock, we continue to focus on those business problems. When we do knowledge management, we don't necessarily want to do everything for everyone. Some of you may experience that in your own organization. Sometimes there's an ask to immediately anyway, do KM for everyone, for everything, solve all the problems. We know we don't want to do that. We want to focus on a specific business problem where we can influence a quantifiable business impact. Our organization, many organizations, the priorities, the structures, everything changes. It changes rapidly. And we see when we align ourselves to a strong value proposition, we can ensure things like buy-in and sponsorship, and really ultimately a degree of survivability. I think that was one of the barriers on the slide that Lynda was showing earlier. In that changing landscape, how do you stick? So that focus on a very concrete, quantifiable business problem was important to us from day one. So I'm talking very kind of classic knowledge management stuff now, and I'll bring AI into the picture shortly. But so
Joseph,
yes.
Joseph, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A and the chat where people are asking if your Sherlock solution is a third party or did you build it yourself? And you might get into that, and that's okay. But I just thought I would throw that out there if you wanted to answer that.
Sure. No, that's perfect. I actually missed the little Q&A button down there. So thank you for calling it out to me. Sure. So I can talk a little bit about that, and then I'll answer some of these questions as we go. When we talk about Sherlock, and this is really important, I think it's important for others, how they're talking about knowledge management in your organizations. We talk about Sherlock as a solution. And a solution, a component of a solution, I would say a relatively small component of a solution, is the technology. But the technology on its own is never gonna really solve your problem. So when we say Sherlock is a solution, yes, there's a third-party technology that we're leveraging on the back end to do that. But when we do things like change management, which Lorenza is going to talk about a little bit later, or when we do things like let's call it business consulting or business transformation or process improvement, none of that comes from the technology or the vendor. That all comes from our holistic knowledge management strategy around addressing that business problem. So Sherlock itself, the technology backend, yep, comes from a vendor. And the AI, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the AI we're leveraging also comes from a vendor. Exactly how we're using that AI though, and that strategy around how we're using it, that comes from our team. So that's kind of where we come into play there. So we had a specific problem that we were trying to address there around market research. And we put that holistic knowledge management foundation in place. Topics that I think as experts on KM, you're all very familiar with, strategy, people, process, content, culture, technology, all that kind of stuff. And I won't go into the details of that today because I want to try and focus a little bit more on where we brought AI into the picture. But just as Ian said, we had that governance, we have those processes, we have the roles and responsibilities in place, we have the buy-in from all the different key stakeholders, and we really created that knowledge management foundation, let's say, and that governed pipeline of trusted knowledge. And that on its own, forgetting anything about AI, that's something that we know, again, knowledge management best practices and things like that, we can scale it, we can sustain it. And we went through all the hoops to make sure everything we were doing was compliant. So lots of conversations with legal and data privacy and ethics and risk and all those different groups within the organization to make sure all of our knowledge management processes that we were implementing aligned with their requirements. So we have a very sort of classic knowledge management problem setup, even solution, and really by implementing that robust foundation, that put us in a very good position when generative AI sort of came onto the scene. And really the change in mindset that this enabled was, as is often the case around not all knowledge management solutions, but many, it's really about findability and access to knowledge. That's what we can do through implementing the solution. With generative AI, there we saw opportunities to sort of move beyond that to use cases and value propositions around the usage and the application of knowledge. And this is great for us because we're always looking for those value stories around knowledge. And at the end of the day, finding and accessing knowledge is good, but the value of knowledge itself comes in, well, where do you apply it? What do you actually do with it? So the closer we can get to that end of the business usage of the knowledge and the stories there, the clearer we can talk about the value that we're driving for the business. So anyway, classic kind of knowledge management solution in place, outcome being we have this trusted and relevant, scalable, sustainable, compliant pipeline of knowledge. So you can just go to the next slide there, Ian. So when Gen AI, as I said, came onto the scene, we started looking at this again, not with the technology, but with the business problem. So what does the business do with this knowledge? How do they use it? What do they use it for? And we understood that in this case, the business was using this market research to create insights and to use those insights to help answer key business questions and make decisions related to the launch of our products. I was just checking the chat there. If there's any other questions, maybe Lynda, if you call them up, that's helpful. But so we had a very sort of clear use case around that. We wanted to analyze and synthesize the content that we have, that trusted knowledge around sort of the market insights questions that the business was coming up with. So we knew generative AI was going to play a role in that. We knew there was an opportunity there. But just as we weren't trying to do KM for everything, we knew that to make this work, we wouldn't want to do AI for everything, right? So we had to optimize the AI for the business problem. As I mentioned, we worked with a third-party company to bring in the AI technology, let's say. But what we had to do to set this all up was to make sure that, of course, we're feeding that with the trusted knowledge from our foundation. But also we're not allowing our users to sort of input random content. We're not allowing them to get kind of creative with the prompts and the conversations. So we put a lot of rails on how users can interact with the AI for this specific use case, for the specific business problem. Because we wanted to make sure, again, that we were, at the end of this, we'd have a way to quantify the impact that we were driving. So in our solution, it's called Deep Sights. Once the user asks a question, what's essentially happening is the AI will generate an answer, but before displaying that answer, it goes through a self-validation loop. So it's looking back and it's saying, okay, I found an answer as using a RAG model, as Gen AI does, finds an answer in the content, but we sort of force it to go back and say, okay, can I validate, can I substantiate that answer before I share it with the human? And if it can't, it will simply say, I don't have an answer, right? And when it does have an answer, it will display that answer, but it will embed in it all the references, and you can click through in those references and see the document as well as the specific page within the document where it came from. And so the end result is a highly, let's say, a highly trustworthy solution, doesn't hallucinate, and our users, when they come to it, they know, because it's from this trusted knowledge, it's doing this self-validation, and at the end of it, they can validate themselves with all these references, that there's a high degree of trustworthiness. They can use this and they can apply it for their business decisions. Importantly, while we've been working to make the AI more robust, one of the challenges I think we all face sometimes is that not all of our users are created equal. So we want to say, okay, well, how can we help? We can do a lot with the technology. How can we help humans? So one of the other things we built into our AI solution here is what we call watchouts. So the watchouts are basically like a coach almost. So when a user generates an answer, the AI is also analyzing, are there varying degrees of reliability in the content? Are there contextual considerations that I should maybe flag up to the user? And so the user can check those and essentially figure out if there's maybe something they've missed, or if they should ask their question in a different way. So we kind of knew that you can optimize the technology, but you also have to optimize a little bit the experience for the user based on where they are in the organization. Some folks are very sophisticated, have the right mindset when they're engaging with something like Gen AI. Others, they don't. They're new to it. So basically, we moved then from having a knowledge management foundation where everyone could kind of find and access, to leveraging on top of that a generative AI solution that was not general, but targeted and optimized for that use case. And because that was being fed, as Ian mentioned, by something we knew that we could sustain and scale, and that was compliant, that carried over then to our AI application. So we knew we could sustain and scale and keep that compliant as well. And that was one of the big misses that we were seeing in other implementations of AI in the organization. We'd see maybe search implementations that pull up all sorts of non-compliant content that people shouldn't have access to. And so there wasn't that underlying knowledge management practices around that to ensure the right access rights or any of that kind of stuff. So basically, it was a garbage in, garbage out situation, and we wanted to make sure we avoided that. So you can just go to the next slide, Ian. Because we were addressing a concrete business problem, we could then demonstrate actual value for the organization. So in the context of Sherlock, and then with the use case of the Gen AI use case with deep sites, we were looking at things like speed to answer. So our marketing teams now could kind of get answers in a few minutes instead of hours or days. Our insights teams, who would maybe be conducting market research that would take 6, 7, 8, 9 months to do, instead they could integrate our solution into their process, leverage knowledge that they already had, and come back with an insight in a matter of weeks rather than months. And then further down the chain, our business leaders who are making decisions based on those insights were now doing so with more robust knowledge, faster knowledge, obviously, and giving them a little bit of competitive advantage where they were making those decisions. On top of it, then, because the original use case, we were enabling people to better actually not only just find but use this knowledge. We have millions of dollars now that we've saved through avoiding the creation or the acquisition of new knowledge, or all that wasted time in terms of generating it. So we had a very so what does that all look like in an actual use case? How's a business using that kind of KM AI application? So this is a real use case I have at the bottom here. It's actually happened. 2 different parts of the organization had the same question. They wanted to know that for a specific drug, do our patients prefer blister or bottle packaging? And so they want to answer this question because they're obviously about to spin up all the manufacturing around the packaging for this drug. So a lot of investment. Once you kind of set that up, you're not really going to change it. And that can influence things like adherence to the drug. If patients in a certain market don't like using bottles, they might stop taking their medicine, or they might ask their doctor to switch them to something that's maybe easier for their hands or whatever. So it seems like a small question, but it has a big impact to the organization. The traditional approach, what one part of the organization did was they went through, they conducted the research. They didn't leverage what we already knew. They said, okay, we need to find new information. And they spent between 50 and 100 grand there to do that research. If anybody here is familiar with primary market research, you will know that that's very cheap. Many times with this primary market research, it can be several hundreds, thousands of dollars. But they were doing some research for 50 to 100 grand, and took them about 3 months. And the output was they were able to survey about 50 patients and create an answer, fairly targeted and generally of limited value. It's a very kind of niche answer. With the Sherlock approach, because we had all this knowledge centralized, easily accessible, and then with deep sites that could begin to use it, interrogate it in certain ways. Another team was able to answer the exact same question with no additional cost. There's no external spend, and they did that in 3 weeks instead of 3 months. And the robustness of their answer, again, because it's leveraging all that trusted, validated knowledge that we have, that we know is relevant, was across like 6,700 something patients. So leaders then could take that insight and feel very confident in the decision that they were going to make on whether to, stand up a manufacturing line around a blister pack or a bottle. So that's kind of the, let's say, the real world impact of what we're doing. And that's the kind of thing that when at the very beginning we start, as Ian said, we weren't looking to do AI because it's cool. We were looking to say, okay, is there a specific business problem out there that we can solve? And that helps, again, with the survivability of knowledge management as a practice in an organization. But it also means that we kind of go right to the forefront of the conversation. People see this as critical to enabling the organization to make better decisions. That's not just something we put on a slide anymore and say, hey, we know knowledge management can help you with this, but by very thoroughly combining knowledge management with generative AI, making sure all those controls are there, people are using this on a day-to-day basis, so they know it. That's beginning to be internalized. And I've been talking a little bit about, actually, I'm just seeing a question there. There's a question in the chat, does it provide an SME they can connect with if they have more questions? Actually, all the questions that we've had there from Cynthia, those are all really good. So today, let's say it doesn't directly do that, but that is on our roadmap. And that's one of the things that we are looking into for next year, basically to bring in that a degree of expertise location. What it does do, though, is because it cites all its sources, and you can go directly to the source document. You can, of course, see, well, where did that document come from? And if that came from so-and-so, you can then connect with them and find out more. The ability to provide the latest update, that's an element of the wider solution. So we have a way in our Sherlock solution, our broader knowledge management solution, where you can essentially set up a query. So if you say, I'm interested in X drug about X patients in X market, you can save that query and basically build a feed for yourself. So anytime there's new knowledge that meets the results of that query, you'll automatically get a notification. That's not integrated into our AI module yet, but that is something that we'll be exploring next year.
And if I can just add to that for Sarah's question. So how do we get the knowledge in? There's a couple of different ways, and that's around governance, which Joseph's team does a fantastic job of making sure that there is roles and responsibilities in the business to get it from the people that have got the knowledge into the solution, right? And really make that lift very easy. That happens for most of the knowledge, but then also some of the knowledge that we get, let's say, for example, for vendors outside Novartis, we ask them to do a piece of primary market research for us. The vendors can actually upload the content directly into Sherlock themselves, which really makes it a lot easier for our people. They don't have to go around chasing people. And so very recently, we've actually made it mandatory, as in a part of their contract, that they have to upload the content into Sherlock. Otherwise, they don't get paid. Right, so that's a pretty decent incentive for them to get the content there. I just wanted to address that. Sorry, Joseph, for jumping in.
No, and that's a good example of what I was talking about before. When we, we're never looking to say, well, let's bring in a piece of technology and it'll solve all our problems. One of the things we looked at early on was getting very close and friendly with our colleagues in procurement and saying, hey, I think we can change the way that the business actually acquires this knowledge to make it more efficient, to make it more holistic, make sure we don't miss anything, and work that in. I just saw a question, I think I lost it now, but there's a question there, I think from Keith around, where did it go? Sherlock gave an answer, but do you know whether it was the right answer or not? That's a great question. And in this particular case, right, that's the next thing. So I talked a little bit about, can we help people to find and access knowledge? Okay, so yes, we can. Can we help them begin to use and apply that knowledge? Well, that's what we're starting to do with things like generative AI and some other things we've got going on. But the next question then is, okay, so when they applied that knowledge someplace, what was the result? So this use case that I've given here, I can't tell you because it hasn't been done yet. I don't know, it hasn't happened. But that's exactly the thread that we're going to follow, to say, okay, if the business went forward with that insight, they made that decision, now let's follow that all the way through at the end. And that's really when we can begin to quantify things like, people talk about the value of knowledge, but they're often talking about the value of acquiring or creating knowledge, which is important to look at. But how much it costs you to get knowledge is not the value of knowledge. The value of knowledge is what you get when you apply it. And so that's kind of the next thing that we'll be looking at downstream. I'll be honest, I think that kind of, unless you're an organization that is answering the same types of questions and problems over and over again, it is a little bit difficult to systematize how you follow those threads. I know what we're doing, I can share, it is a little bit tricky, but we're doing that on basically a case-by-case basis. So when we see a good question, a good use case in the organization, then we begin to follow the thread and say, okay, where does this go? How are they applying it? What's the impact? It's a little bit tricky to do that at scale if if you're doing such a wide variety of questions. Go ahead, Ian.
You're going to put me on mute soon, right, Joseph? So one of the other things I would mention about that blister versus bottle case, it's a fascinating example. Actually, the use case for Sherlock there, deep sights was critical in starting to answer that question, but it wasn't the full answer. That's not the point. We're not always trying to answer everything in one go. What it was the kind of the kernel, the start of that answer. And then people could supplement that by doing additional research, like Google in and whatever, to get the complete answer. So how was it validated? It was validated because you don't just take that answer and run with it. And that's not what we're saying. What you do is you use that as a supplement and massively speed up the process to get to insights, right? Instead of 3 months, it took 3 weeks because they were able to use what they found in deep sights in Sherlock, which took them 5 minutes, not even, right? And then they were able to kind of run around and get other stuff together to see if that was the right thing. And it turned out that, yes, it was. And that's how we're suggesting to use it. It's a supplement, it's an addition, it's an enhancement to the tools that you've got already. It is not a one-shot, answer. That's not the game that we're playing here. I hope that helps. Sorry, Joseph. I will go on mute now and I'll shut up.
No, I think that's good additional context to add. I see there's a bunch more questions, but I want to make sure we also have enough time for Lorenza. So I've been talking a lot about governance, process, content, technology, that kind of stuff. But as I said in the intro, you can have the greatest solution in the world. If people don't use it, you're never really going to realize that value. And that's really where Lorenza comes into play. So I'm going to hand it over to Lorenza now. She's going to tell us a little bit about driving change, how we drive change, and how we drive adoption of our solutions.
Thank you. So yes, what do we mean by adoption? So first of all, there are 3 important elements that we pay attention to. So awareness. First of all, associates need to know what Sherlock is and how to use it, who should use it, and when the knowledge available to them is when the knowledge is available. Essentially, they also should see the value of Sherlock and deep sights so that they really are willing to be part of the journey, but they also need to have the capabilities to make the most of it. So these 3 elements are really all key and interlinked in order to drive adoption. And what do we mean by adoption? Really, that staff in Novartis really go to Sherlock first and to find the knowledge that they need to do their job and that they use it, but also that they leverage the Gen AI capabilities, so deep sights, to add the value in the work that they do. And we use 4 key levers as part of our change management effort. So the sponsorship obviously is fundamental. So having the leaders' endorsement and having the leaders publicly endorse Sherlock and deep sights has been key in driving traction, but also ensuring that we have a 2-way communication with our users so that we can really understand them and bring on board any feedback that they have. We also have to build their capability and build also foster a knowledge management culture to make sure that whatever we do is really sustainable. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, but even before we drive adoption, we really need to understand our audiences and the target users of the solution. So what we did on Sherlock is really, we started having these conversations with the users in the business. And one thing that we built, that this allowed us to build, is to work with personas. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of personas, but essentially these are fictional characters that represent the Sherlock users in the business. So defining the personas really help you put yourself in the shoes of the users, understand their job to be done, their pain points, their needs. And then obviously this is very important when you build a solution, but also when you do change management and ensure you really communicate in a way that resonates with them. So this actually, understanding your audiences then enables you really to, first of all, build the right value proposition. So what's in it for me? So people really can understand why they should be on board. And one of the way we have been doing this is to really tie the knowledge management and AI work that we are doing with the wider business objectives and priorities. So people really see how this is part, it's not in a vacuum, but it's really part of the big picture. And also, as has already been said, we have really invested a lot of effort in collecting and sharing success stories from our people in the business, how they've been using Sherlock and Deep Sites to really work smarter. And this has always been backed by quantitative data as well. So for example, a reduction in primary market research spend. And then the other thing that we have been working on is really understanding and identifying the behavioral triggers. So what does make people tick really and act and change their behavior? So I'm going to talk a little bit more later, but we have applied behavioral science principles. We also have made sure that we had sponsors on board. So whether it was about having the sponsors and senior people in the business sending out key communications about Sherlock and Deep Sites, or even being featured in videos, for example. And then recognition and rewards have also played an important part. And when we say recognition and rewards, it can go from thanking the key people in the business who have been helping us make Sherlock, who are driving Sherlock adoption across the world, but also rewarding them, for example, with things like spark points that we have in Novartis. So you assigning gifts, so you can really have lots of different things and mechanisms to really make people make them feel valued. And then another important part has been to proactively manage resistance. So obviously, with all new things, and AI is no exception, people can be afraid, they can fear for their job, they can fear that they can be concerned about the compliance aspect. So what we did is really worked in a close partnership with some teams in Novartis, like legal, but also ethics, risk, and compliance, to make sure that we de-risk the use of Gen AI. And as my colleagues mentioned earlier, for example, we built in watch outs in the solution, so that people were really aware of, if there were any flags, but also we demystified a lot Gen AI. So we really made it clear and easy for people to understand what it was about and how it could actually help them in their job. And we built their capability, because it's being something new, we really had to build their skills around it. And we also piloted with users. So before rolling out Deep Sites, for example, we did a pilot with select people in the business. And that was really helpful, because not only it allows us to bring on board some of their feedback that we could then feed also to the tech provider, but also it helps us to surface some use cases. So for example, how should we ask specific questions to Deep Sites in a way that produces the best answer? So all of that, those best practices really came out of the pilot that we did. So that was really great. So all of these then bring us to deliver the right messaging, to really craft the right message that really resonates with your audiences. And understanding your audiences also help you understand which channels you should leverage to better reach them. And then Another important thing that I'd like to mention is that we have leveraged a champions network. So we have individuals across the world in all the countries where we want to drive adoption. And they are really our eyes and ears on the ground, because obviously we can be everywhere. We're the central change management team. So we need these people in the various countries to help us amplify communications, amplify really the what's in it for me, for the people in the various countries, and also bring back feedback to us. So that we can continuously improve both the solution, but also how we do communications. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'd like to conclude on by mentioning that we have adopted a test and learn mentality throughout our change management efforts. So we really said, okay, let's understand our audiences, let's understand what works with them, and then based on, let's measure, and then based on what works and what doesn't, let's pivot accordingly. So for example, as I was saying earlier, we applied behavioral science principles in some of our campaigns. So specifically, two principles that we applied. One is called the authority principle. So essentially, as human beings, we are really sensitive to what authorities say. So if a message or a call to action comes from an authority person, then we are more likely to comply. So in this case, if a leader tells you to use Sherlock, you are more likely to actually do that. And the availability bias essentially is about really making sure that you recall the pain of not having a solution and having to search through, hundreds of repositories to find the knowledge you need, and then introducing the solution Sherlock at that point. So that should make people more likely to use the solution. So we tested these two principles with different user groups, and to really see which one worked better. And for example, we discovered that the authority principle is more effective. And we also got lots of other learning. So if you look at the chart on the right, for example, you can see that we notice that push communication still is great at driving traffic, so in terms of increased logins on Sherlock, but also that, as I was saying earlier, leader-led communication is definitely the one that is really most effective at driving traffic. And when we say leaders, it's really about different types of leaders as well. So it should be an authority for the user group that you're trying to reach. So, and if you look at the chart, you can see some spikes when there was communication sent by specific leaders in the business. So yeah, and emails again confirm, at least for our user groups, email seems to really be the most effective channel at reaching people and driving change and adoption. And then, yeah, I would like to conclude on saying that, it's also important. So for us, it's very important to track, obviously. So when we do our campaigns, we have some KPIs that we want to track, and but it's also important to understand, to be pragmatic about what you want to track. So rather than tracking, having too many, being obsessed with tracking all the number of clicks on the links that you may have in a communication, it may just make more sense to focus on real adoption measures. So really looking at how many people actually are visiting Sherlock, how many new users are going on the platform, and how many people are actually using it as part of their daily job. So really doubling down on what works and let go of what doesn't work. This applies to our job. So I think that's it from me. I'm gonna look at the chat.
We have so many questions. You all are doing a great job. With 3 of you here, you're able to answer a lot of them in the chat. So hopefully everyone's keeping up with all of those. I love this. Is there any open ones that any of you want to answer, so you can stop typing if you want?
Yeah.
There's one thing that I want to call out here, and it's really on this slide, and this test and learn mentality. This is the core to the success of everything that we've managed to do in Novartis, in my opinion. The change management is just such a fantastic example of where Lorenza and the team have done that. But it goes through everything that we've done here. If we found out tomorrow that the Gen AI isn't adding value, I tell you what, by the end of the week, it'd be gone, right? And the way that we find out that is through the test and learn mentality, right? It needs to provide users value. The most important thing I would say is build this into your roadmap, right? Unless you build it into your roadmap, you will forget to do it, or some priority will come up, and whatever happens, you won't do it, and then you'll just keep doing the same stuff that you've been doing forever, and you won't get better. This, for me, this is core.
Okay. Someone asked in the chat as well if the knowledge sharing, if that culture is something that's I'm going to add a little bit to this question. It's about, is it part of people's performance objectives? But I'll even take it further and say, is it kind of part of your culture already, or are you having to do kind of all of that at the same time that you're rolling out this concept of Sherlock as well?
Yeah, I can start with a little bit on that. Yeah, it's funny. So are we doing it all at once? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. But what I'll say is, so I think we talked about it a little before. So there is a core team, right? And I'm going to accept that core team, because for that core team, every day we come to work, we're doing knowledge management. So of course it's part of our job, but we are not necessarily the people from whom this knowledge originates, right? So, and that's really where the sharing has to start. So where does this knowledge originate? What I will say is, and it's a bit chicken and egg, I'll admit that, but where we've seen success with this is because we're so focused on those business impacts. Once you get that first group sharing and using, and then they're turning around and saying, hey, actually, we're doing everything faster, or we just saved $1 million on this project because we're using this thing. You start to get people pounding on your door and saying, hey, we want that too. And just, like everybody else, when they say we want that, what do they mean? Oh, they point to the technology and they say, yeah, let's just dump our content in there. We're very clear with them at that point to say, you can have this amazing thing. This is what it requires. So that knowledge sharing might not necessarily be built into people's performance objectives and all that kind of stuff. But we will say there's this kind of governance required. That's going to take 30 minutes of people's time per month. They have to do this. They need to check in here. They need to be accountable for that. And we explain those roles and responsibilities and say, if you're willing to commit to that, well, then you get access to this. In the beginning, that's difficult, and that's why I think it's important to have that targeted use case, that value proposition, because you need to get somebody bought in to start with. But then once your organization sees it working, it becomes a little bit easier. And I'll tell you right now, we are constantly getting requests to expand the scope of Sherlock. We have people knocking down our doors. They want their content on there. They want their teams using it. And that's one of the things that we're talking with those people about all the time. Say, okay, but really, this is not technology. This is people and process. And you need to have your people and process committed, or it doesn't go anywhere.
I love it. There's one final question I'm going to have you guys close with, I think, because it's kind of philosophical. So I think it's a good, profound way to end our webinar. But someone in the Q&A asked, they said many companies use AI to automate processes. But what about when AI works alongside people, complementing their skills? Do you believe this human AI symbiosis is the most valuable path for companies?
I talk a lot in Novartis about human plus, becoming human plus, right? We are very, very good at some skills. We are absolutely terrible at other skills. AI is good at some things and it's absolutely terrible at other things. It so happens that there is a nice kind of convenient overlap between the things that people are terrible at and the things that AI is good at, right? So processing lots of data, right? You, with the deep sites that we've just shown you there, you don't have to look through a 50-page PowerPoint deck anymore. And you don't have to look through 150-page PowerPoint decks anymore. You can ask it a question, it'll look through and it'll find you the answer, summarize that answer and give you all the references if you want to, if you're bored one night and you want to go and look at the 50 pages. These kinds of things, I think that is actually what's most important here, is understanding the tool, understanding the limitations of people and making those two things work together harmoniously, right? That's the critical part that we're at right now. And to go back to the very first part of the presentation, why I think so many people get it wrong, because people think, oh, Gen AI's here, it can solve everything, right? Well, no, it can't. It's a tool and it can solve this bit over here. Joseph likes to talk philosophy.
Absolutely.
Joseph, have you got anything to add, or Lorenza?
I was just thinking, I saw there was another question in the chat there about managing expectations, and I think that's kind of related to this as well. I'll say Copilot. Many companies, let's say, have Copilot introduced into their organization, and Copilot has its use cases, and it can be quite useful for things. we saw with the implementation of Copilot in Novartis anyway, that there was a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confused expectations. Well, what can I actually do with this thing? And again, that goes back to the use cases. So we are very proactive about managing those expectations in the organization by saying, for example, Deep Sights is going to help you to answer market research questions, generate insights that we can use for those business things. Deep Sights is not going to create a PowerPoint slide for you. Don't bother. It doesn't do that. If that's a big need for the business, we'll create another solution that does that. Or maybe we'll expand Deep Sights to have that capability. So it's always about being very clear on what is your value proposition for the organization, what are the use cases.
Awesome.
And with leadership or people on the ground, we're very forward and upfront about communicating that. And I think that goes a long way to managing those expectations.
I love that. You're getting lots of good jobs, thumbs up, and thanks for the great information. And yes, to remind everybody, you do receive a copy of the recording and the slides within 2 business days after our webinar. With that, I just want to say thank you to our amazing friends from Novartis for sharing their story. Such a great holistic view of how to combine AI and KM together. And I know it won't be the last time that we hear from you. So stay tuned. There'll be more to the story, obviously, in the months and years to come. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.